All right. Let's see. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Artist Talk with Raluca Iancu. My name is Paloma Mayorga. I am the director of PrintAustin, and we're super excited to have Raluca here with us today. She is going to be giving an artist talk and presentation, and then at about 7:40, 7:45, we'll open it up to do a Q&A at the end. Feel free to drop any questions that you might have for Raluca along the way in the comment section, and we'll address them at the very end. So joining us today again is Raluca Iancu, and she is a great printmaker who is participating in this year's PrintEXPO 2021. So we'll be having a vendor profile for her that will be going live on February 6th, along with the rest of our PrintEXPO programming. Raluca participated in the contemporary print last year and had a really great print-based animation. And I guess I'll let you take over, and if you want to introduce yourself in your own words, and yeah, I'll let you get started. Thank you so much for being with us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to give a talk as part of PrintAustin. I'm so excited to be here, and I love PrintAustin and all the great programming that you've been putting on. Yeah, like you said, my name is Raluca Iancu. I am an assistant professor of printmaking at Iowa State University. In terms of background, I got my MFA from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and my undergrad from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design University. And yeah, we can go ahead and get started.
Cool. Oh, hold on. There we go.
My work explores tragedy, death, memory, and vulnerability through different mediums, ranging from printmaking to performance, to edible art, assembled, oh, no, sorry. This always happens, right? There's always like a technical thing. Anyway, fiber sculpture, and finally, assembled prints as well. I question the way that we look at disasters as well as the way that we deal with the aftermath. This particular print is based on one of the early crashes of the Tesla Model S. Not the first fatality, but it does remind me, at least, how much we depend on our technology, whether it be planes, trains, or automobiles, and easily forget that it is just as fallible as our bodies. Ultimately, all physical contact is a collision with permanent repercussions, whether those are visible or not. I do mainly work with printmaking. I do consider myself a printmaker. So this here is a 6-foot wide 2-block reduction cut. But installation and sculpture are an essential part of my work. I always do begin with printmaking, but I like to give the idea the space to guide the final form that the work takes. So I always try and take advantage of each medium's inherent qualities. I'm flexible in my approach to art making. It's the idea that drives my choices about materials and techniques. So in this particular case, I needed a car to crash. And I was really interested in creating 3-dimensional works after seeing Red Grooms's playfully sculptural work, as well as Jim Shaw's theatrical installations. What I found interesting about this work is that on the front side, it's polished, but then you go around the back and you see all the support infrastructure. So to get back to our lemons, what better car to crash than the Trebent? I chose this car very specifically. I grew up in Eastern Europe, and I wasn't old enough to really experience communism on a conscious level, but my parents certainly did. And the Trebent was the butt end of many jokes which I recall from my childhood. And if you ask during the Q&A, I might tell you some of them. I don't know how much you know about the Trebent, but essentially, this car was East Germany's response to the Volkswagen. It is the world's first car made out of recycled material, Duraplast. not because of any sort of green initiative, rather simply because metal just was not really available in the USSR at the time. So the irony is that I made a paper maquette of a paper car. So the joke is that my version is the more durable one. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, many Germans crossed the border into the West. And yes, you guessed it, they're Trebents. And then they just abandoned these things in the field. And I can't say that I blame them. These are awful cars. But it's interesting to me, right? The vehicle of their salvation is just left there. So to me, the Trebent symbolizes both communism and its fall, as well as freedom. So I really thought of this as the perfect car to crash. I deconstructed it, printed it, reassembled it. I made many versions of this. So this image here, the car is made from the exact same template as the cars on the last slide. This one's 3 times bigger. But this is an example of how I allow the medium to push the idea. Here, it's really just because of screen printing that I was able to change the scale and the substrate. I decided to print the Trebent on canvas because I noticed that there weren't any plush toy cars aside from toys based on Disney's Cars movie. And this is still largely true, although I did recently see a stuffed X-Wing. But regardless, you don't see a lot of stuffed machinery on shelves. You mostly see stuffed animals. And I really love this idea of a squishy machine. I'm thinking of it as a car that you can crash over and over again with no consequences. I like that tension between the notion of toy and disaster. At this point, you might be wondering, what's with all the car crashes, Raluca? I really do consider that in our contemporary culture, crashes of all kinds are trivialized by their frequent appearances across the spectrum of mass media, especially now as our access to information and the internet is more widespread than ever before. I mean, did I think I would be doing an artist talk live over the internet a year ago? No, not so much. We as a society have become desensitized to these traumatic events. And forgive me, I'm going to get a little bit academic here for a minute. As Jean Baudrillard writes, The Implosion of Meaning in the Media, he writes, and I quote, "The loss of meaning is directly linked to the dissolving dissuasive action of information," end quote. So the more we are exposed to these images, the more they lose their meaning. On the other hand, these events are still a spectacle, despite the very real casualties. As Virilio writes in The Original Accident, I quote, "Daily life has now become sheer luck, a never-ending accident with its many new developments, the spectacle of which is inflicted on us at every moment via our screens," end quote. What I find really interesting about this is that he writes this in a book that is published in 2007, the very same year that the first iPhone is released. So we are even more surrounded by screens now. And these images of disaster permeate mass media. Disaster is the perfect locus to observe that line where function and dysfunction bleed into one another. The illusion of control and privilege are irreversibly challenged. That fantasy is denied as the fabric of one's life is ripped apart. In the face of a large-scale disaster, we discover how small and insignificant we are. So this particular image is pulled from satellite images of the 2011 earthquake and tsunami in Japan. Many of my prints are based on real events. I choose what I depict based on the backstory and cultural significance. It's no accident that I choose these images. So this particular print is based on images from the wreckage of the Ethiopia Airlines Boeing 737 MAX 8 that crashed en route to Nairobi. So I combined several images from videos from a variety of sources, including Reuters, the European Press Photo Agency, the BBC, CNN, graphs, maps, and I combined them all together to tell the narrative of this sensor failure. In many ways, my work does do the same thing as mass media. It presents you with image after image of tragedy. The repetition is intrinsic to the medium of printmaking. And my work forces you to become voyeurs through the simple act of looking that is so common on the roads. However, we change the context from the news media to the gallery, although that line is thinner now than ever before. Although the content deals with disasters, the delivery is joyful and even humorous at times. It's all with the intent to lure you in. Initially, the work looks like candy, inoffensive. It's bright and colorful. However, upon a closer look, the image turns out to be a traumatic event with potential casualties. I draw the subject matter in such a way as to soften the image, to make it more approachable and friendly. Some might even call it cute. And we usually see the cute as diminutive, harmless, helpless, but there is great subversive potential in cuteness. Just look at the work of Takashi Murakami. In this case, whether there's a death toll or not is uncertain. That is up to you. I like to develop this tension between your immediate reaction and your expected response, as well as between your initial expectation and the image that you are actually confronted with. While my work is intended to be lighthearted, car crashes are most certainly not. And this, again, becomes a difficult reconciliation within your mind. Humor becomes both an access point as well as a challenge to your morality. I am interested in that thin line between fact and fiction, or as Stephen Colbert calls it, truthiness, particularly as it pertains to the depiction of disasters in the media. So this series is a little bit sneaky because all of the prints that I just showed you in the Lilliputian Collisions series, these prints are actually based on drawings of ceramic pieces that I slipcast. So I made molds of toy cars and then literally smushed them together. But I exhibit these prints and books alongside with my other work, which is based on real events. So this is all with the intent of calling into question the source and authorship of the images that we are presented with, whether that is on the media or elsewhere. I'm not the only one to be fascinated with car crashes, so we're going to take a quick tour of cars, specifically car crashes in art. Chamberlain, who, although he always denied the importance of the source of the car, in interviews, he referred to it as just like metal. I think that actually that's what makes his work so powerful. It's the fact that it is a crushed car. Warhol, arguably the first to look at the effect of mass media on images of disaster. Charles Ray, here he replicated a crashed car in its entirety in fiberglass, and this included wrappers and pieces of paper in the back seat. Jonathan Shipper, in this particular sculpture, he's pulling together two American muscle cars slowly towards one another, thus creating a very slow motion car crash, which can take anywhere between 2 days to a whole week. And Dirk Scrubber, who used actual car safety testing facility to wrap these cars around their poles. I don't think it should be a surprise that so many of us are exploring different aspects of the car. It is one of the most significant developments of the 20th century. The car is ubiquitous. We are constantly relying on it, particularly here in North America. What I find interesting about it is that at the same time, cars offer us endless facets for the consideration of life and death. Take the airbag. It is meant to protect life, but it can also serve as an indexical mark for the automobile crash. It can even be a cause of injury and death in and of itself. Some of you might recall that 2015 marked the largest airbag recall in the United States. Takata manufactured defective airbags that exploded with so much force that they sent shrapnel into the passenger compartment. When I started making the work, there were about 28 million vehicles recalled in the United States, and that number has grown to 67 million in the United States alone, which brings the global number to over 100 million. It is very troubling and somewhat ironic that something intended to preserve your life may actually cause the opposite effect. In the series Things That Go Pop, I use images of defective airbags to create a series of dry point prints. I isolated the images from their original context. So all these images of airbags were taken from images, pictures of cars which had had a defective airbag. Some of them even exploded at the recall facility, which was part of the problem. They would just suddenly go off on their own. At first glance, they look more like academic studies of pillows rather than immediately as airbags, thus cushioning the impact of the image on you, the viewer. The dry points were paired with inflatable sculptures and also video. The translucent inflatable sculptures were impermanent. They deflated before the viewer's eyes during the opening. In this way, they were both humorous, but also a testament to the pathetic failure of these devices. So as I mentioned, this is the first video. So the exhibition was paired with, we may have a technical issue, we'll find out. So this is one of the videos that accompanied the exhibition. In it, various things are, well, you might guess it, popped. Roadkill is also an inescapable part of the legacy of the automobile. The development of infrastructure, which has altered and isolated wildlife habitats and populations, and careless or mindless driving both contribute to the amount of roadkill that we encounter far too often on the roads. To me, roadkill is emblematic of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Separated from the outside world by our windshields, we create a culture of indifference as we learn to ignore the lifeless bodies of any size littered on the roads. In roadside attractions, I once again pair sculptures and prints. The prints are usually lithographs, but in this case, it's a digital print, featuring representational drawings of roadkill within a color field, while the sculptures are small-scale needle-felted works, combining wool and blood-red Swarovski crystals. All of the sculptures are based on photographs of actual roadkill. The roadkill image functions here both in a literal sense as well as a metaphor. Many interactions we have with other people are just like these collisions. We are selfishly oblivious to our impact on others. In this work, death is not only implied, but materialized and centralized. However, it is also very clearly a representation, sanitized and pretty. It's literally bejeweled. The interaction with the roadkill sculptures is on a personal level. They are so small that you could hold them in your hands. They can be protected and cherished. And yet, who would want to safekeep a rotting carcass? Yet another hallmark of modern civilization, the train. This installation features a 13-foot-long train compressed into a window space that is 9 feet wide. It combines screen prints on paper, actual lights, and an infrastructure. This installation is modeled after a real incident that took place in Chicago in 2013. So this was a site-specific, or Yes, site-specific installation. The crash that happened in Chicago, it was a commuter train that was parked in a service yard, which somehow, without a conductor, moved onto a rail line and smashed into an oncoming train. As far as the Chicago crash goes, the investigators never figured out why it was moving in the first place. I'm interested in strange incidents like this one because they shouldn't have happened at all to begin with. They defy logic and remind us that failure goes hand in hand with advances in technology. Although there were no casualties in the event that this piece is based on, the installation yet again leaves that up to the viewers. The three-dimensional nature of the installation also allowed me to play with showing a crushed exterior and an unaffected interior, so presenting two simultaneous conflicting views of the same event. In many ways, this work was a prototype for this larger installation. It's not easy to stop a train. It's true. This is a larger immersive installation, similarly themed, but entirely fictitious. When I created this piece, I was interested in creating an environment for my viewers, much like Thomas Hirschhorn's Concordia Concordia. It's meant to be overwhelming. Hirschhorn talks about how the saying too big to fail no longer makes any sense. On the contrary, when something is too big, it must fail. By comparison, the quiet, contemplative nature of my installation is quite evident. In my case, you are presented with a single crashed train compartment. It is large enough to enter. And once you are inside, you are confronted with a little bit of controlled chaos. There is some overturned furniture, but I wanted to make sure that there was a space in the middle where you could sit should you choose to. I am deviating from my usual color usage here. The black graphic marks on the white surface refer to the representation of such disasters in newsprint, typically black and white. It also makes the train non-specific. It could be any train anywhere, so it makes it a quite versatile installation that is easier to relate to than a specific crash. In North America, most people think it's a bus, and that's all right because it's about this collective experience. Yet again, here I'm using large-scale screen prints. I wanted to echo the production of real trains with the mechanical reproduction. But rather than using printmaking in a more traditional sense to create an edition, I used the repeated images to produce a singular object to create this environment. I used a non-woven nylon fabric for this work, so even though it appears quite solid and concrete, in reality, it is soft and malleable. All sharp edges are purely visual, not physical. And although the marks are printed, each transparency that I use to make the printing elements is drawn on a 1-to-1 scale. The frenzied, obsessive lines of the drawing echo the state of mind of someone having recently experienced trauma. And while the installation presents the audience with a situation in which control has been lost, the audience is free to choose how to interact with it, if at all. They can sit quietly in contemplation and watch each other interact with it. Or they can take advantage of the photo opportunity and re-perpetuate the image, mimicking mass media. It's really that audience interaction that adds a layer of humor that is so important in the work. By posing for the photographs as injured or dying passengers, the audience can experience a moment of catharsis through playful roleplay. Regardless of how they choose to interact with this piece, the act of going inside the train renders the audience members morally complicit. So the installation presents you with the crumpled end result of a collision, but not too much of a backstory. So rather than focusing on the climax, it brings attention to that quiet moment of reflection afterwards. So I decided to create some companion pieces titled Reconstruction Attempts. In this series, these pieces are really about trying to figure out what happened. Each piece represents a different version of the same event. So striving to reconstruct a memory, although in this case it is indeed fictitious. The repetition here mimics the obsessive nature with which we revisit traumatic events, asking the same question over and over again about what happened, or why, or how, why me? We trust our memory and we believe that it is accurate. However, the very act of remembrance can distort those memories. As Dr. Sarah Ades writes in False Memories, and I quote, "Memory is a faulty reconstruction of our mental experiences to begin with, susceptible to being influenced by our prior knowledge, beliefs, goals, mental state, emotions, and social context." End quote. So, what we remember may be different from what we experienced, and those differences can evolve over time. In much the same way, I modify the prints by cutting and reassembling them, occasionally out of sequence. The reconstruction attempts are reminiscent of children's bedroom carpets, covered in colorful houses and roads. They're ready for play. To relate to that realm of childhood, I also used primary colors. As the collective comprehension of traumatic events shifts from a mature viewpoint to a childish one, trains and other vehicles become toys for adults rather than machines with serious consequences. To quote J.G. Ballard, "Reality is turning into a home movie in which an infantilized version of ourselves runs across a garden of artificial grass." End quote. To create these works, I used a combination of hand-cut lino cuts and CNC router cut wood cuts. I wanted to take advantage of the CNC router to create sharp lines that relate to drafting and industrial processes. It really afforded me great accuracy while also allowing me to engage with cutting-edge digital technology. I was also interested in connecting the contemporary to the historical. The hand-cut pieces introduce the element of the individual experience, here specifically within the context of a rail disaster, but the pieces are intended to evoke any kind of trauma that is obsessively revisited. In the most recent iteration of Reconstruction Attempts, and this is the piece that Paloma was talking about that was in the contemporary print last year, I started taking these different elements in the prints and creating stop motion animations. Endlessly looping, these trains retrace their trajectories. They almost have a mind of their own. Sometimes they collide, but not always. History repeats itself. At the same time, this piece reiterates that element of play. I play with these paper trains in much the same way a child might play with their toy cars on their carpet, although I do it in an achingly, back-breakingly slow manner. The work also shed some light on the process through which I arrive to the final collages. I always see these works in motion, with the collages representing just a frame within the animation. I developed this way of working with an earlier piece, which was titled Sequence of Events, which was installed in an outdoor gallery by the train tracks in Monroe, Louisiana. So here, the underlying pattern for the roads is based on a combination of overpasses from my hometown of Montreal. There is one spot there that is constantly under construction, and it's kind of terrifying to drive through there. For anyone from Montreal, I'm talking about the 20. I'm interested in the work existing outside the conventional gallery and the potential dialogue that can happen with the location. Here, between the train tracks and the overpasses, two different but not unrelated transportation channels. I also wanted to create something that functions on multiple levels. Again, from far away, this appears as purely decorative, but upon a closer inspection, it reveals diagrams of unique interactions or events peppered throughout. Arrows attempt to explain the sequence of events, creating the narrative. For the observant onlooker, there are little Easter eggs throughout. In the most recent work of 2020, as the world was on fire, I started focusing on environmental disasters as well. So this piece is based on an aerial photograph of some of the smoke in Shark Creek in Australia that obscured the land. Initially, this piece was actually about the fires in California. But as I completed the work in late 2020, in my mind, it also started talking about the COVID pandemic and just the state of the country as well. So this book, it features a combination of monotypes, laser cut paper, hand drawing, and hand tinting as well. With Tornado Genesis, this book in particular, right before the semester started here at Iowa State University in the fall, a week before classes started, we were hit by the derecho, which is this strong directional wind. I believe the winds were over 100 miles per hour. And just a year prior to that, when I was living in Louisiana, my hometown was hit by a tornado, which downed a huge tree in my backyard, narrowly missing my house. And so I was thinking about how this wind just seems to like keep following me. So it's kind of like not quite, I wouldn't call it an autobiographical work, but I was thinking about how the tornado builds and creates, referencing here how over time it kind of lifts and grows and moves forward. So here, this book is made with dry points and monotypes and some hand tinting and monoprints. It's actually hard to remember everything that went into this particular one. But that's where I'm at. Right now I'm focusing on dimensional books that deal with natural large-scale disasters, which feels like a natural progression of my work. And that is it. This is the end of the talk that I had planned, and I'm really looking forward to hearing any questions that you might have.
Yeah, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them into the comments section on whatever platform you're watching, and then I'll help facilitate. I actually had a question, and I feel like obviously your work is dealing with tragedy and trauma, and I'm wondering if this is, for me, it seems like it would be a lot to constantly like deal with those themes, like as you're creating artwork, but is this like a way for you to process? And yeah, so like how does that help you process, I guess, is my question.
No, you're absolutely right. I actually go through cycles of being over traumatized by the images that I look at. So I'm talking a lot about desensitization and what happens if you just don't stop after that point. If you keep looking at these images as you become resensitized. So I do have to take long breaks from the work occasionally. So the work with like car crashes and based on actual things that are happening, I keep going back to it, but I do have to take breaks from it. So that's where some of the other work, like the trains, which are about the idea of memory, but not about a specific memory, that allows me to still engage with the content, but not necessarily constantly be looking at images of crashes, because it does get to be quite a lot, for me at least. Yeah, I definitely get crash fatigue.
I get that. Was it the same with some of your wall sculptures?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like I just imagine you were modeling it after actual roadkill. So I'm wondering like how the desensitization played into that.
No, absolutely. I mean, some of those, like I have a sculpture of a civet, which is a small kind of like furry, uh, like marten-like animal of Australia, and it was a picture of like one of the last ones. So it's like on its way to extinction, and one of the last, or maybe the last one, is roadkill, and I found that really quite sad. Those pieces are also needle felted, so I don't know how familiar you are with the process, but it's literally you have this piece of wool and then you stab it. So the action itself, it's like 1,000 little stabs. It makes me think of, like microaggressions. But yeah, I think each one of those took between like 8 hours on the short end, and who knows, like a whole day for one.
I mean, that's really impressive. I've seen like process videos of those, and that's yeah, that's a whole other way of thinking. Let me see. Oh, I actually just got a text. Somebody texted me a question. So, what's on the horizon for you in 2021? Do you have any projects coming up?
I do. I'm actually in the process of drafting some pop-up books about, you guessed it, natural disasters. um, I was actually supposed to do to complete 2 artist residencies in the summer of 2020 in Japan, and I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that I get to go this time to do that. So I want to focus on mokuhanga and to bring more sustainable practices into my studio, and yeah, more pop-up books.
Oh, can you explain what mokuhanga is? This is the
Oh,
second
yeah,
time I've heard it this week, actually. So, but I don't know too much about what it is.
yeah, so this is the Japanese art of wood block printmaking, which the difference between Japanese wood block printing and Western printing is that they use water-based pigments. So you can achieve some very modular effects, but also in terms of cleanup, it's, it's like watercolor. So it's
Wash
in
it right
terms of,
out.
yeah, exactly. But it's also like really amazing the different kinds of effects that you can achieve with mokuhanga. And I feel like that would be really appropriate for something that deals with natural effects.
That's really interesting because you take certain processes like the repetition of screen printing to replicate those I guess the mass production of things. So I'm really interested to see like how you're going to use something that's a lot more like hands-on. There's more of that artist touch in it. Have you thought about how that's going to play into the concepts that you deal with?
Yeah, so actually the last book that I showed, the one with the tornadoes, it's something that I was thinking about because I find that I'm making fewer and fewer editions unless I'm in an exchange portfolio. I don't really edition any of my work anymore. I tend to make all unique prints and to create variations through hand tinting. So I think it's very much what will happen with the mokuhanga prints as well, is that I'll have a lot more variation. So more like mono printing rather than just a straight up edition. And I
Cool.
think, there again, like there's the tension between the mass manufactured processes, which we're so used to in the industrial world, and that element of personal experience. So to me, that's what those unique pieces bring. It's that level of intimacy, that level of individual experience within the larger construct of mass manufactured replicas.
That's a really beautiful interpretation of that. Thanks for sharing that. I have a couple of other questions that I've been getting in. One person asked, "What is your favorite printmaking process?" You have experience with so many different ones, so do you have a favorite?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's like asking someone which one their favorite child is. I honestly, I love each one of them for different reasons. They have such a different look and such a different history. So I find myself rotating through each different medium. So the last big body of work was a lot of woodcuts. I have a feeling screen printing is coming around, and then moving back into woodcut and intaglio. It's been a while since I touched lithography, but I absolutely love the feel of a freshly grained lithography stone. I don't think anything else compares to it.
I feel like that's just something that only printmakers can understand. I mean, the times that that I tried that out in school, it was just such a laborious process, even more so than the other printmaking processes. But it was not for me. But I feel like lithographers are like hardcore lithographers.
Yeah, I
uh,
was teaching a screen printing class in the fall, and one of my students was like, I really respect this. This is so much work. Like, oh, just you wait.
oh man. Um, So I actually had a question too. What like I really fell in love with your print. Was it Child's Play? Is that the title of it for the stop motion animation with the trains? And I was just really curious as to like what inspired you to bring in stop motion animation.
Yeah, it's actually that really is the way that I make many of the works in the collage series was I would be like playing with them. And then at the time I was teaching a drawing assignment that was a charcoal drawing assignment, and I was thinking about like William Kentridge, and I was having the students do stop motion animations, and I was researching all these different apps that they could use on their phone. So it started with using like a stop motion animation on my phone as I was composing something, and then it just quickly developed into something much more involved. So that piece was made over 2 weeks at the Hambidge Center for the Arts and Sciences. So it was 2 weeks of just like capturing pictures nonstop. I think I was working every day for like 12 hours a day. And then it took another couple of weeks to edit everything together and to create the sequence. But yeah, I really do like play with them. So it's interesting in that way. And I was talking about the works, and whenever I would talk about like, yes, they're in motion all the time, everybody would look at me like, what? We don't get it. And then as soon as I made the animation, I was like, oh, okay, we understand what you're saying now.
Yeah. Let's see. So one person is asking, because you are a professor, how you balance your art practice with academia. Like maybe it gives you inspiration the way that it did for the stop motion pieces.
Yeah, it's hard for everyone in academia, you know, how difficult it is to balance everything. I do find that whatever class I'm teaching, all of a sudden I find myself more interested in that process. So I try to, you know, whenever I make a demo, like, is there a way that I can use this for my own artwork? It never happens. It always ends up being like a really silly, like, wallpaper of cactus. But it's always in the back of my mind, like, if only I had thought ahead and I had sketched this earlier, then I would have been able to like actually make a piece in front of the students. One thing that I did find is that the students really love seeing me in the studio. So last year I was working on, like before everything happened, I was working on a portfolio piece for SGCI for Kelly Nelson. She has a portfolio titled Printilla. So it was all about making these boats related to different ports in Puerto Rico, and they were assembled. It was one of the first slides in the talk. And it's a double-sided reduction layer lino cut, and it was supposed to be just like, I don't know, 2 layers on each side. It ended up being 3 or 4 layers on each side. So anyway, the point being that I was in the studio all the time after class on the weekends, and I was working in there with the students side by side, and they really enjoyed seeing that. Like, that's what the life of a professional artist is like. It's like nonstop.
Yeah.
A lot.
Was that print in particular like something that you could see through to see the layers on the other side, or was it more like something that you walked around or handled? Because something that I find really great with your work is that, and with your print work specifically, is that you change the relationship from the viewer to the print. We have to view your works in such a different way that I'm personally not used to with printmaking. So yeah, like I'm curious about that print.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love that comment because it's something that I think about a lot in terms of materiality and interaction. That print is the way that it's assembled. You can actually see inside it, so you can the other side. And then I made extras, so I assembled them. You can assemble it on either side. So whichever side you choose, one side is the cultural legacy of Puerto Rico, and the other side is all like the natural resources. So one side is blue, the other side is red. So it's really easy to see when you walk around or if you handle it and play with it. I also gave a couple of away to friends, so that people are meant to interact with it, cut it up, which is weird, I know. But it is meant to be interacted with, and it's got so many layers of oil-based ink on it that it's, for a paperwork, it's pretty resilient.
With the oil-based ink, does it leave like traces on the people that handle it, like on the hands of the people that handle it?
Unless they handle it when it's wet, but no, if it's dry.
Okay.
Yeah.
So whenever you exhibit prints like that, do you just kind of like leave it up to, whoever is approaching it to decide what they want to do, or do you give them prompts? I'm in particular, like I'm interested to see like how the train installation, when people went in it and then they posed like they were being ran over by it, or they were, part of the crash that happened inside. So do you give people prompts to interact with your work?
I allow them to just participate. I like, especially with the train, and there's another wallpaper piece, which I guess I could have talked about in retrospect, but I think it's much more interesting when people bring their own experience to the work. So fun fact about that picture, that was actually my mom and my grandma.
Oh.
My grandma was the one on the floor. But it is malleable, so if somebody chooses to like bend it a different way, they can. So it's definitely in a little bit of worse shape now, but since the work is about trauma and memory and the way that we interact with it, I feel like that's actually really appropriate for the work, that it over time it degrades. So with the boats in particular, they're more sculptural objects, but with the upcoming pop-up books, I do imagine that people will actually interact with them. There will be movable elements. So I would rather people to like actually open it. So there will be a separate exhibition copy for that one.
That's always good. I think as like the gallerist, you're always like, you want people to interact with those works when the artist, again, like prompts you to, but it's always like such a, I don't know, very nerve-wracking whenever people are handling the work.
I do have with the edible work too, right? It's like once people eat it, it's done and it's gone, and it's a limited edition, because I'm not going to be making candy that's shaped like coronaviruses forever. But
let's see. We have another question about your teaching, and this person is wondering how remote your teaching has been during COVID. And I guess I'm wondering like how it works for printmaking, because it's such a like hands-on thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's been challenging. At the onset of the pandemic, I actually learned how to 3D print, and I 3D printed those little presses from the Open Press project. So thank you, Open Press. Those were great. I was able to make them for all of my Intaglio students. So I sent them home. I mailed them to some students who had already left. So it was in the spring, we transitioned to completely online. So it was all about making kits for the students, figuring out different print methods that they could do at home. So it was a lot of like rubbing relief prints by hand and stencil making and, some frottage. We think of rubbings as this like really basic thing, but as soon as you start to make your own plate for textures, it becomes much more interesting. In the fall, I decided to go hybrid because there's just nothing like the studio. So I split up all my classes into 2 different groups that would alternate on online days versus in-person days. Scheduling is very tricky, but at least they were able to use the presses in the studio. There would be maybe only like 4 or 5 students at a time in the studio, and I was able to. I've got in the studio right now, I have 4 etching presses, so I could assign a student per press. Yeah. So they're physically distanced, and then we had to sanitize everything at the end of the session to make it ready for the next group of students. So definitely much more involved, but I think hybrid has been preferable to completely online, for me at least.
Yeah. And so with the open air presses, sorry, it was, you said that you were doing intaglio, so were you doing like tiny intaglios?
Yeah, really tiny, like postage stamps. I had a stack of these little, like, 1.5 by 1.5 copper plates that I sent the students home. We had been working on state proofs, so creating etchings and then printing them, adding more to them, printing them again, and making animations out of them. So some of the students really enjoyed that process, and they made some more on their tiny little presses related to the pandemic. So there's one of my students made the little animation of like a Purell bottle just being pressed over and over and over again.
It's very clever. Let's see. If anyone else has any questions for Raluca, feel free to drop them into the comments, or, I mean, if you have my number, I've been getting a lot of questions texted to me. Cool. Well, for PrintEXPO, for those of you who weren't at the beginning of the talk but joined after, we have our PrintEXPO 2021 conference and print fair coming up on February 6th, and Raluca is one of our participating artists. And then I'm curious, Raluca, if you have any new prints that you'll be showing as part of that.
Excellent.
Or will you have like work available for sale as well?
Yes. Yeah. As far as I recall, all the work is available for sale. I am actually planning on getting back into the studio this very weekend. So hopefully within the next month or so. I suppose saying this out here now is going to keep me accountable to do that.
Yes. Awesome. And then one question that I just got. So with, okay, sorry, it's hard to read and relay at the same time. So with like the multiplicity of prints, right? Like you have several available in an edition. Do you work in editions whenever you work with like with some of your collages, or do you work with just the one singular collage?
Oh no, I work on plenty of things all at the same time. So like we were talking about crash fatigue. So I have like about 3 or 4 bodies of work going on at the same time. And even with the collages, what I did, so those prints, the background is all from one block, and then the train cars themselves are from a separate hand carved block. So I made, I don't know, I never counted. I don't count anymore because it's not good for your health, but probably 50 to 100 background prints. And then again, like 50 to 100 train prints, and then cut all of them out. And then it's very much a process of assembling things and mixing and matching. So it's very hands-on. And I can't do just one at a time because covered in prints all at the same time. I usually work on about 3 of those at a time.
Okay. Okay, cool. Well, if there aren't any other questions, is there anything else that you want to let us know about? Yeah.
No, just thank you again for this opportunity. And I really enjoyed our conversation and being able to share my work. And yeah, I'm very excited for the print conference on February 6th.
Yeah. And for everyone who's listening, I'm going to drop the link into the chat. And it is just printexpo.org. And you can visit the website now and take a look at our lineup. And we actually just published our schedule for the PrintEXPO conference. You can RSVP for the conference, and we'll send you the direct link. And then like I mentioned before, Raluca's vendor profile, along with the other artists that are in the participants or in the lineup tab, all of their profiles are going to be going live on February 6th, and a lot of those artists will have prints available for sale directly through printexpo.org, as well as through their own websites. So go on there and check it out. Check out who's going to be presenting that day. And yeah, and we can't wait to have you guys join us. And again, that's on February 6th. All right. I don't think I have any other questions. Yeah, so I think that's it. So thank you so much, Raluca, and it was such a pleasure having you and getting to learn more about your work and really like it's so cool to see like the diversity of the types of work that you do. It's really great to see how all of like your concept just translates into so many different mediums. So thank you for sharing that with us today.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that insight as well in the questions. They were great.
Awesome. And let me see, I'm just going to drop the website and Raluca's website into the chat as well, so everyone can check out more of her work.
I just updated my website.
Nice. So that is ralu.ca, so ralu.ca, and that'll take you to her website. Okay, well, again, thanks so much, Raluca. It was great having you.
Thank you.